Living in medieval England was notoriously deadly, with a life expectancy of around 30 years. But why was this? The Christian church was very prevalent in medieval society, pushing the idea that God caused all disease as a punishment for humans or to test their faith. This was acceptable for most people in medieval society, which held back medical research heavily. This was especially due to the fact that the church didn't allow dissections and instead relied on animal dissections to construct the human body. The church also heavily controlled the spreading of information, as they were the ones who ran the universities which trained physicians. Also, unlike most people, monks and priests could write, which meant they were the ones scribing books, which controlled the published information at the time. The church also promoted its followers to follow Jesus' example to care for the sick. This meant that most hospitals were ran in monasteries and nunneries. Other than religious ideas, the church also pushed the ideas of the Greek doctor Galen, who developed the theory of opposites in the 2nd century. The theory of opposites originated from the 4 humus theory created by Hippocrates. This stated that there was 4 factors in the human body that controlled the state of health. These were blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Galen said that if any of these 4 humours were out of balance, then they would have to be rebalanced to make you healthy again. So, for example, if your blood was out of balance, then a doctor would use leeches to decrease the amount of blood until you were better or dead. It was most likely the latter. He also said that the humours were linked to the seasons and the elements. So if a patient had too much phlegm linked to water and cold, then they'd have to eat hot peppers to rebalance the humours. Another popular theory at the time was that illness was caused by bad air, or miasma as they called it. This was linked to religion, as they believed that God sent these smells to cause disease and illness. Surprisingly, this theory carried on well into the 19th century. Some methods to prevent supernatural illness at the time were chanting incantations, living a Christian lifestyle by going to church and obeying the commandments, carrying lucky charms or amulets, or self-punishment in the hope that it would prevent God's punishment. While these are insane and obviously not true, people at the time didn't have many rational ways of preventing illness, though some were bathing and washing, exercising, not overeating, purifying the air, and keeping streets clean. These methods would have actually been quite effective, despite them not knowing the theories behind them. While there were physicians at the time, it was very unlikely that you'd get to see one unless you were very rich, and even then they'd likely just send you to one of the other options after surveying your illness. Barber surgeons were the main source of basic surgeries at the time. As you can tell by their name, their main occupation was cutting hair with a side gig of doing surgeries. This meant they were untrained in medical theories, not that the ones at the time would really help. They carried out bloodlettings, teeth removals, and amputations with a very low success rate. Needless to say, they were not very expensive. If you wanted medicine or an antidote, you were often sent to an apothecary, who mixed medicines and ointments with their own knowledge or on a physician's instructions. They received basic training but no official qualifications, so they were cheaper than a physician but more expensive than a barber surgeon. As I said before, most hospitals were run by the church, but there were also some privately owned ones. They were often set up on common travel routes, so pilgrims and travellers could get rest and be treated. This was their main purpose, however, with most people with actual illnesses or disease being turned away in fear of infections and spreading. While they weren't actually used to treat disease, people there were given fresh food, water, and a place to stay, and the environment was kept very clean, which would have actually prevented the spread of disease more. From 1348 to 1349, England was hit by the Black Death, a plague that killed over a third of their population. Today it's believed that the Black Death was caused by fleas on the backs of rats who were brought over by trade ships from Europe. But back in the Middle Ages, they had some more unique ideas as to what spread the disease. There were many reasons, including that God had sent the plague as a punishment, the positions of Mars, Jupiter and Saturn were unusual, that poisonous gases from European volcanoes caused it, an imbalance of the 4 humours, or strangers and witches. They also had unique ways of trying to prevent catching the disease. including praying and fasting, cleaning up the rubbish on the streets, smelling other bad smells to try and overcome the plague, lighting a fire or having birds fly around in their room to keep the air moving, carrying herbs and spices to avoid bad air, and not letting unknown people in their towns. While most of these would have done absolutely nothing to stop the spread of the disease, ones like cleaning up the streets would have actually helped the citizens, as it would remove the bacteria from where they were. The treatments used were just as outlandish, making the sick pray and hold lucky charms, or eat cold things and take gold baths, or cutting open the buboes to drain the blood, or alternatively, putting a loaf of bread on the buboes and burying it in the ground. I think it's safe to say with this approach to illness, it would have been a miracle to just survive childbirth, let alone 30 odd years after that. But do you think you'd survive? And if you do, I'm really glad your ego's thriving.